Hey Bible lovers, I'm Tim Nichols, and I'm here to bring you a different kind of Nicholsworth today. We're going to be talking about the ESV and a potential update. Every time we update a biblical text, it's always very controversial. We have the 2001, which was the original. Then there was an update in 2007, and then there was another update in 2016 where they changed about 52 verses. And the most controversial among them being Genesis chapter 3, verse 16, where it says, "Your desire shall be for your husband, and he will rule over you." Now it says, "And your desire will be contrary to your husband, but he will rule over you." That has a lot of the complementarians up in arms about how that should be translated. I don't know Hebrew enough in order to be able to really determine any of that, but I do know that it was controversial, and it does change the meaning just a little bit. But for me, I really don't see an issue either way, whether it's for or contrary to. That verse is basically talking about the fact that sin has corrupted everything to include marriage. It's also going to have a negative effect on the role of husband and wife. I'm really not there to dive into that, but we're going to talk about the potential of this update and the ramifications that it could have. Perhaps they're going to take Genesis 3:15 and switch it back, but there's been talk of an update to the ESV for several years. We know that the committee meets about every 5 to 7 years to consider updates, and I just think that is utterly ridiculous. To meet every 5 to 7 years to update a biblical text to me just doesn't make sense. And that is why about 2 years ago, I made a commitment to the New King James Version as my primary preaching translation and my primary reading and study translation, because it has not been updated since 1984, and they are committed to no textual updates. I think to update a biblical text every 5 to 10 years is just too much. Language doesn't change that much, and we always run the risk of going into theological bias. And we've seen that with the NRSV where we've gone into theological bias in the area of gender and becoming overly gender neutral rather than gender accurate. And we cannot let the culture and the times dictate how we handle the Word of God. And my concern is that the ESV may be headed that direction. Now, I do know that their translation committee is largely conservative, so they're largely going to have a complementarian, usually a reformed point of view. So we do know that the gender roles are probably going to be safe. They're not going to monkey around with those too much, but there are some changes being considered. I'm going to read a part of an article for you. You're welcome to read the whole thing. I'll put a link to that article on the end screen. But this article that you're seeing on the screen right now is from World News Group. And this is a Christian organization dedicated to giving sound journalism about biblical facts and biblical truth. And they had a chat with Wayne Grudem. Wayne Grudem, seen right here, is a theologian, a scholar, and he has some of the best theological works out there. He's retiring from teaching ministry. He's 76 years old. He actually has Parkinson's disease. But there are some things that he's still going to do. He does have a few books coming out, and he is still on the ESV Bible Translation Committee. And when asked about that translation and what's going on, he said, "I'm on the translation committee for the English Standard Version Bible, and we meet every 5 to 7 years to consider possible revisions to the text. We haven't met now for 9 years, so we're meeting in Wheaton, Illinois in July. That is this month as of the posting of this video. That is also the headquarters of Crossway. So they're meeting in July to consider 120 or so suggested changes. I suspect we'll accept 30 or 40 of those suggestions, where just little tweaks to the wording will make it consistent to where we've translated the same phrase elsewhere or something like that. Very small changes, hardly noticeable, but we feel a responsibility as a translation committee to take seriously any suggestions that people have sent." Here we go, y'all. We're about to see likely an update to the ESV. One of my biggest issues with translation updates has very little to do whether or not I trust the translation committee. It's the fact that it makes the previous editions go out of print. So then you have these Bibles that many people have spent large sums of money on that no longer have the latest textual updates. But really the core of my issue with translation updates is we seem to have this idea that we constantly have to be tinkering with the text in order to keep the language modern. And I just think that is overrated. We also tend to overrate modern textual discoveries and their importance to the text. And while I do think we need to consider modern scholarship, we can update the textual footnotes. I don't know why more translation committees don't utilize this approach. Go ahead and update the textual footnotes to relay recent discoveries and then just move on from there. But the constant tinkering of the text, it makes it difficult for churches when they have pew Bibles and all these different things. And yes, some of the changes may be quite minor, but people generally want to have the latest and most updated text. Some may consider this a money grab and a copyright issue, and I'm not here to get into the middle of all that, but it is a little concerning to think every few years, every 5 to 7 years, we have to make changes to the biblical text. This is one of the primary reasons that I switched from the ESV to the New King James, because they would not commit to a static, stationary, stable textual base. And for me, that's why I'm out on the ESV as my primary translation. Now, I love the ESV. It is my number 2 translation, right behind the NKJV. I enjoy reading it. I think it is among the greatest modern translations to date. Because they are committed to textual updates, I just can't keep it as my preaching text and as my primary reading text. I want it to be the same. I want the text that I have in my hand, I want my Bible to match the Bible that my congregation's reading, and also match what's on the screen. Once these textual updates occur, then software updates, and it causes all kinds of issues with different verses. Yes, he's saying it's only probably going to be about 50 verses of the over 100 that were suggested, but for me, I would rather have a stable text. That's why I love the New King James, and that's why I moved on. I preached and taught from the ESV for over a decade. I love the translation, but when I started hearing rumblings about a textual update, I just decided that I needed to move to something a little more stable, and the New King James and the ESV are so similar, especially in that poetry where they read beautifully. So while I understand the Translation Committee wanting to be committed to keeping the ESV relevant and keeping the language modern, I think that textual updates are overdone in our country. And I would imagine they would not need to be done, but every few decades, not every few years. So let me know what you think about the ESV and the proposed updates that are going to be looked at this month, and who knows when they'll be implemented. But eventually the ESV that you hold in your hand is probably going to wind up out of print, and they're going to be selling it with the textual update, whether it be called the 2024 update, the 2025 update, or whenever this happens. So there you have it. Keep calm. Jesus on.